Today we're going to look at the first part of Mark chapter 4, a section that I'm just going to call simply parables. It goes through a number of parables, and I think in Mark they're just meant to be representative of Christ's teaching in parables. They're not exhaustive. Mark doesn't claim they are, and we know from both Luke and Matthew that there are other parables that Mark does not write down or record. Parables are stories that are representative of Jesus' teaching. They're meant to, at one time, reveal a truth, but also conceal it at the same time. There are, as I said, parallels in all the synoptic gospels that have similar meanings, but they can also be used to make different points, as we'll see as we look through this. The first parable that we're going to look at is found in Mark chapter 4, verses 1 to 9, and that is the parable of the sower. And it begins and ends with a warning to listen. And I think that is, again, meant to help us understand that parables are written to both reveal and conceal. So if we are to receive the message and the teaching of the parable, we have to listen not only with our ears, but with our heart to understand what Jesus is saying. And in the parable of the sower, Jesus talks about 4 different types of ground that the seed falls on. The first is the path. The second is the rocky or shallow soil. The third is the weedy soil. And fourth and finally is the good soil. And then Jesus goes immediately to describe this parable. And there's a good reason for Mark to put this parable first, because it talks about people's differing response to the gospel and to his message. And it fits well in with whether or not a person is going to understand these stories. But he explains it to the disciples and some other believers who are gathered after the crowd is gone. And Jesus explicitly states that he speaks in parables so that they would be ever hearing and never understanding. And says it quite strongly in Mark's gospel that otherwise they would repent and believe and be forgiven. So that's a challenging verse for us to grasp, but I believe the meaning is that Jesus wants people who are open to his message to hear and to understand it, but he knows that there are those who are not open to the message, and so their hearts will be hardened by it in much the same way as Pharaoh's heart was hardened when God spoke his commands to him. So he describes the 4 types of soil again, but this time gives the meaning behind each of them. The path represents the seed that falls on the hard ground, and before it has a chance to take root, it is stolen away by birds. This is a reference to Satan coming and stealing the message and snatching it away from a person's heart before it has time to take root. The second is the rocky soil. Rocky soil is shallow. So while the ground in a rocky area would be probably warmer than the rest of the soil, and so it would spring up very quickly, but because there's not enough room for it to really take root, as soon as there's any kind of trouble or storms, or as Jesus talks about persecution, these people fall away. And remember that this is being written to believers in Rome who are in danger of falling away. So this message is very timely for them. The third type of soil is soil in which there's weeds present. And of course, they choke out the seed that as it tries to grow. It's in competition, and so therefore it doesn't grow. But this is related to people who are too concerned about worldly things, whether it's money and the false security it provides, or the desire for money and things that take away from our true desire, which is to love God with all of our heart, soul, and mind. And the final, of course, is the good soil. And the seed that falls on good soil produces a crop many times what was sown. And that shows that the message, the gospel message, is powerful and makes a real difference in people's lives. The next parable is the parable of the lamp on the stand. And this is found in all the synoptic gospels, but it's used in different ways in each of them. In Matthew, it's talking about the believer sharing their light, their light with the world. The difference their life has made because they are believers, and also the message of salvation that they are entrusted with, that needs to be shared with the world. In Luke chapter 11, verses 33 to 36, it actually emphasizes more this idea of introspection and self-understanding, that we are to examine ourselves to make sure that we are in the light. And finally, in Luke 8:16 to 18, the context is the same as what we're going to look at here in Mark, and that is that the secrets of the kingdom will be revealed, that ultimately those things that are hidden will come to light, and they will shine forth. And so that it's a promise of that the hidden things of the kingdom will not be hidden forever, but will in the future be revealed for all to see. The next little parable, it's a very short parable, it's a parable of the measure. And again, it's found in all synoptic gospels, but it's found in different contexts. And as I noted before, not only is it found in different contexts, but Jesus wiggles out different meanings in each of these passages. So it's not uncommon for Jesus to take one parable and have it mean more than one thing. So in Luke chapter 6, verse 38, we see the parable of the measure is used in connection with the Beatitudes. In Matthew chapter 7, verse 2, it's used in connection with not judging others. In Matthew 13:12, it's used actually in the context of the parable of the sower that we just talked about. And in Matthew 25:29 and Luke 19:26, it's used in connection with the parable of the talents. But here, Jesus is using this parable of the measure as saying that the more you listen to and come to understand the meaning of the gospel here and now, the greater will be given back to you at the end of days. And so that is part of it. And the other side is, if you have a little bit of understanding about the gospel and you don't build that up, that what little bit you have will be taken away from you. And I think that reflects the reality that if we understand the gospel and its meaning, we won't stay stagnant, but we will be motivated to go deeper and learn more about God. The next parable is found only in Mark, and it's the parable of the growing seed. And the emphasis that Jesus places here is that the farmer sows the seed, but it's the mysterious workings of the seed itself that produces the harvest. Yes, it needs to go into good soil, but that mystery is taking place whether the farmer is awake or sleeps. And so there's a emphasizing the mystery of the kingdom, but also the growth in the kingdom, that it happens in a way that is not fully comprehensible to us as human beings. The next parable is the parable of the mustard seed. This is found in all of the synoptic gospels, and the meaning is the same. And that meaning is that from small beginnings, the kingdom will become great. Jesus uses the mustard seed as a seed that is very small, It's not the smallest seed in the world, and it's not maybe even the smallest seed that Jesus was aware of, but he spoke this way because it was most likely the smallest seed that the people he was speaking to were aware of. But either way, the message is the same, that small things can become great when God is in them, and that is in fact the case with the kingdom. It's going to start very small, but it's going to grow large. And we have seen that fulfilled in the history of the church, that it started out with a very few followers and now has billions of believers around the world. And Mark chapter 4, verses 30 to 32, just is a summary statement on the parables that we can take from this summary, that Mark was not trying to create an exhaustive list of parables, but just highlight some main ones. He gives them as an example of the way Jesus taught and how he went about this, that he spoke the parables to the large crowds, and then he would explain the parables more fully when he was alone with the disciples and other believers who were gathered around him. So that's a basic rundown of the first part of chapter 4 of the Gospel of Mark, and the very clear section that is related to parables.